All right, hello everyone. Eric Marks, FindingMiddleEarth.com, and tonight I'm going to make another video here, based on a viewer's question that came in. Tonight's question came in from Joyce, so thank you very much for following the channel, Joyce. And I thought the question kind of warranted a very important answer because in this world of photography and gear, so many different camera companies come out with new gear all the time. And when there's not new cameras coming out, there's new lenses and new accessories, and it's really easy to get wrapped up in all the gear, okay? Believe me, I know, I'm a tech guy, so I really enjoy, all the little new features and the cool techie stuff, but I have to, at the same time, ground myself and realize, hey, where should this money be put to in my business? So the question basically was asking me which camera. She was trying to decide between two cameras for landscape photography. She basically said she just does like tripod landscape photography, pretty much nothing else. And so she was trying to decide between like a used D800 or some kind of used Nikon full frame, or the Nikon D500, okay? And she's coming from, I think it was a Nikon D3100, 3200, something like that, with a kit lens. So she has no nice Nikon glass. It was just basically this little kit lens in the camera, and she's just wanting to upgrade. So, of course, when she told me this, I was thinking, well, when I was reading her email, I was thinking, why is the Nikon D500 even on this list when you're trying to decide between a used D800 or used D810 versus the D500? I'm trying to make sense of this. And so I emailed back with just that. And if Joyce, if you're watching this, you know that we've already, I've helped you make a decision, and we sorted everything out. But basically I emailed back and I said, why is the Nikon D500 on your list of possible cameras to get? And she said, oh, well, the touch screen and this and this. And she started naming things like the number of focus points, the touch screen, the snap bridge. And as she was naming this, I was thinking, there are so many features in cameras that are just convenience features. They're not really there's a big difference between convenience and image quality, okay? Convenient features do not equal image quality. It has nothing to do with the camera or the sensor. It just has to do with the ergonomics sometimes and the actual convenience of the software in the camera. So basically I told her that. We exchanged a couple of emails and we talked, and she said that makes so much sense, because she told me she's just doing landscape photography, and so when you're talking about a used 36 megapixel camera or something like that versus a brand new $2,000 crop sensor 20 megapixel camera, it just doesn't make sense when you're comparing these two. And so I'm making this video because what do you guys look for when you're getting a new camera or when you're upgrading? There are so many people that will, take their phones or their iPads or whatever, computers, looking on the spec sheets, and they'll just say, oh my gosh, this new camera came out, it has 4D autofocus, 4 million focus points, it goes to 5 billion ISO, add to cart, done. Man, can't wait till that gets here. And then it arrives and they have issues with it, or it doesn't fit their kind of photography. I've done photography now for about 14 years, and I could not tell you what the heck 4D autofocus is. There's all these new techie names that are very exciting and that it's good marketing to get people to buy stuff. But let me tell you the important things to look at when you're getting a camera. There are two big things that get overlooked, probably more than any other things. The biggest thing that probably gets overlooked by almost everyone is dynamic range. What is dynamic range? It's the amount of detail that the camera sensor can capture in the darkest of darks and the brightest of brights, and how it averages them back down to a correct exposure. So it's how much detail can the camera see in the dark, in the shadows, and how much detail can it gather in the light, the highlights, right? That's basically eventually having to eliminate HDR photography. I would love to be able to eventually have a sensor that has like 18 stops of dynamic range to where HDR photography and digital blending isn't even needed anymore. And I think we're headed there, which is great. But dynamic range is a huge thing, especially if you're doing landscape photography like Joyce is doing, and like I do. So think about like dynamic range. They very rarely list those on the spec sheets on all the camera stores. You have to end up going into DxOMark's website or going into the actual camera brand's website and looking up like deep into the specs, and you'll find how many stops of dynamic range. So I would say a good dynamic range is around the mid 13 stops to 14 stops and above 14, 14.5, 14.8, because my Nikon D810 has 14.8, I think 14.8 or 14.9 stops of dynamic range, and it is amazing dynamic range. Okay, it's phenomenal. And the Fujifilm cameras have really good dynamic range as well. That's one thing I looked at the Fuji X-T2 before I made my decision. And Canon cameras, the Canon DSLRs, that they're notoriously known for not having very good dynamic range. And yet, when so many people get into photography, they just naturally say, oh, I'm going to get the Canon Rebel, the T5i, the T3i, whatever, because that's just like the obvious choice. Look at the specs, right? It's only like $600 and you get a lens and you get a touchscreen, all these Wi-Fi and NFC options. And it's like, all those features and things, the convenience features are great, but they do not equal image quality. And in the end, that's why we buy cameras, right? To get great images. So I would much rather have a camera with scuffs and dents in it that had the oldest software imaginable, but took unbelievable pictures. It had an amazing sensor in it. So that's just me, but dynamic range is one of them. The second one you want to look at is ISO. Now, you might think, oh yes, I know, I looked. It goes to ISO 4 million, so I bought it. I'm not necessarily talking about high ISO. I'm talking about how low does the ISO go and what is the quality of the images at that ISO. So that can get a little confusing. But so many people, when you think, oh, what's the ISO on the camera? They immediately just say, oh, it's 4 million or 1 million. Or I'm not asking about the high ISO. I'm asking about the lower ISO. Because one big selling point with the Nikon D810 when I bought it was that it goes to a native ISO 64, which the dynamic range and the image quality at ISO 64 is brilliant. So ISO and dynamic range, I think, are the two most overlooked specs when people go to purchase cameras. And I don't mean ISO in general. I mean the lower ISO, the image quality and the dynamic range at the lower ISOs. If you have to go and rent the camera to figure this out, rent the camera. You don't always have to pre-order the camera before you ever even see it or hold it. At this point, I feel pretty comfortable buying Nikon cameras without holding them and seeing them, because I'm just very familiar with them. But if a new Fujifilm camera comes out, like the X-T3, X-T4, whatever, when we get there, I'm not familiar enough with Fujifilm. I haven't shot Fujifilm for years and years. I would still want to rent it or go to a camera store multiple times, pick it up and play with it, like I did with the X-T2 before I bought it. So yeah, I just wanted to make this video because that email from Joyce kind of spawned this whole idea that I think so many people are caught up with the new, latest, greatest techie specs, and they're not really thinking about how that is going to affect the image quality, because 9 times out of 10, those techie specs don't affect the image quality at all. It can sometimes just suck up more battery, and it's a feature you might not even use. Like with me, touchscreen would be great, sure. If they had a touchscreen on the D810 or the X-T2, it'd be great, but I really don't care about a touchscreen. I have one of these, it's called a thumb. I can rack a wheel in and zoom in on my photo. I don't really care. I would rather have more dynamic range, better low ISO, something like that. So like, for example, the future Fuji cameras, I would love to see them go to ISO 100 or ISO 64 natively without it being like a boost low or a boost high mode. So yeah, think about low ISO, think about dynamic range, look at those things before you buy a camera, and don't just look at the first 10 features that the websites, B&H and Adorama and all the big Amazon sites, the first 10 that they mention are always things that typically don't matter as much, except for maybe the focus points. But that really only matters if you're doing something that, you need to track a lot, or you want, you do wildlife photography and you want a lot of focus points for tracking. But another thing, I just thought of this. This video wasn't scripted. I literally got the email and I just kind of turned on the camera. So excuse me if I'm kind of rambling on, but I just kind of thought of a third one. Third one is, what exposure value does the camera autofocus in low light? So a really good low light autofocus would be -3 EV, which is a -3 exposure value. So look at that too. I don't care if you have to dig into the dark net to find this information, okay? Go anywhere you can to get that information on the camera, and take a look at dynamic range, low ISO, and the how many negative EVs it can focus in. Because if you're a wedding photographer, that's going to be real important to you, is how snappy is your autofocus in low light. I remember having issues with that in the past with other cameras. That was a big reason why when I was shooting weddings, that I bought a Canon kit instead of my Nikon kit, because my Canon 5D Mark III smoked the pants off of my D800 when it came to snappier autofocus and low light autofocus. Because I think it was like -2 EV or something like that. But yeah, so a lot of the newer ones are -3 EV, and I think some of the Sony cameras, the A7S, A7S II might even be -4. Don't quote me on that because I'm not sure, but that's a big thing to look at. These are things that you think about when you've been a photographer for years and years. And so I just want to share some of that knowledge with you guys. Hopefully that helps. So those are kind of 3 key things to keep in mind when you're looking at a new camera. You know, don't worry so much about how high the ISO goes and if it has a touch screen, if you can pinch to zoom, and you know, if the camera talks back to you through Siri and has all these wireless functions. Those are all great. Don't get me wrong. They're very cool features. You know, they're cool to impress friends. But at the end of the day, why do we buy a camera? To take and make great photos. And that's really what it's all about. It's all about that sensor that sits there inside the camera. So look at all the specs you can about the sensor. Obviously read reviews, but the sensor is what it's all about. It's the image quality. What is the camera going to be producing for us when it's not doing things like touchscreen and shooting our images across the cloud and all that stuff. So, yep, if you guys have any questions or want to if you guys have any other things that my new viewers or kind of photography newbies need to think about before buying a camera, I'd love you guys to give them advice as well. If I'm not thinking of anything, just put them down in the comments and hopefully you guys will help someone as well. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. If you would like to stay up to date on all of my latest photography videos and adventures, click the big subscribe button below. And if you would like to find out more about me and how to become a great photographer, visit my website at findingmiddleearth.com.